Hi again, thank you ARIA, thank you Tiasha, thank you Brandon, Uros, Lara, and everyone else that's involved in making this wonderful assembly happening. So my name is Lukáš Likavčan. I'm a philosopher by training, and my research focuses mainly on philosophy of emerging technologies, ecology, and philosophy of science, especially astronomy. I'm affiliated with NYU Shanghai, where I used to be a postdoc. Now I'm an affiliate researcher, especially with the Center for AI and Culture there. And the reason is that I kind of jumped off the academic ship recently. I'm in a transition to actually preparing to launch my own consultancy company. And I'm also affiliated with two non-academic institutions, which I kind of consider also like close collaborators for already some time, and that's WACH Future Lab, which is also one of the key institutions behind ARIA, and Berggren Institute, which is an institute that I work for in the capacity of being an in-house researcher of the speculative think tank called Antikythera. So if you're interested in any of these institutions, or you want to chat about how it is to transition between the academic and non-academic context, please reach out to me, feel free to reach out. And just a bit of the background regarding my research publications, I would say. I've published my first monograph in 2019, which is titled Introduction to Comparative Planetology. And I talked here a lot about what is the planet, both from philosophical and cultural perspective. Some of the more recent research in this direction of understanding what is the planet has been published in the paper that was released this spring, which is called Another Earth, with the subtitle Astronomical Concept of the Planet for Environmental Humanities. So again, please check it out if you want to see some of my background research that leads towards my short contribution today. So for the past 4 years, I've been mostly preoccupied with answering this question, which I picked up where I left it in Intro to Comparative Planetology. What is the planet? But as I delved more into this question, I've actually realized that what really interests me is not answering this question, what is the planet, but posing a bigger philosophical problem, which is related to how does the planet relate to me? How does the planet relate to individuals and collectives? Hence, my ongoing book project, preliminary titled The Planet of the Selfless, asks, how am I called upon by the planet? The idea behind this question is following. Climate change is an encounter with something that imposes limits and obligations on human communities, but also unveils a new sense of subjectivity. Today, I do not have enough time to speak about the idea of encounter per se. So I just want to say that an encounter is in my understanding a kind of event, a rupture, properly speaking, an unexpected occurrence, perhaps an accident that was always waiting to happen. Some other examples of such encounters include spiritual epiphany, something my colleague at NYU, Bogna Konyor, so nicely talks about, or a traumatic life event that throws a person into a completely new frame of reference, or perhaps a political revolution as a moment of the decisive rupture between society past and the society's future. To understand my point about subjectivity, we need to observe first that each person is called upon in different ways by different entities or structures. This is the point that was already rehearsed to some extent in the previous discussion. In each case, some community is presupposed by the act of being called upon, by being interpellated, and some mode of life or some type of subjectivity is imposed on a person. Examples: state, I am called upon as a citizen, a member of the political community. Platform, I am called upon as a user, as a member of the cloud police. God, I am called upon as a believer, a member of a community of a church. Heteropatriarchal society, I am called upon within the schema of gender binary, either man or female. And you can envision some other examples of such, let's say, less or more oppressive regimes of interpellation. From that, it follows that the planet is also some kind of structure that interpellates me, that calls upon me. But what is a resulting mode of life, the type of planetary subject? That remains an open question. One way how I could answer this is to look first at what the planet is. And indeed, I have developed an account of what I call an astronomical definition of the planet, which I will unpack a bit during this lecture, especially in the second half. But today, my starting point will be somewhere else. Instead, I'm going to tell you right away how I think we are called upon by the planet. And after that, I will reverse engineer, to some extent, the plausibility of my claim through unpacking the supporting philosophical assumptions. One thing I may warn you about right away is that what I plan to propose you can be reasonably problematized as being covertly theological argument, and I will not shy away from such interpretation. There is a similarity between an encounter with the planet and an encounter with the divine. The similarity lies in an imposition of a non-negotiable obligation. You must change your life. The obligation to change one's life is something German philosopher Peter Sloterdijk calls vertical imperative. I find this idea extremely vital because it encapsulates an obligation which we do not choose, but which chooses us. Once we are called upon as planetary beings, as members of the planetary community, there is no way back. We must change our lives. So how am I called upon by the planet? The planet calls upon me as a selfless body. Let me explain. What are selfless bodies? My favorite point of departure here is philosophy of Dutch STS scholar and philosopher Annemarie Mol. In her recent book, Eating in Theory, she develops unorthodox metabolic take on philosophical anthropology. That means philosophy of what does it mean to be human. Her suggestion has also a form of a question. What if we were to stop celebrating the human's cognitive reflections about the world and take our cues instead from human metabolic engagements with the world? Or to put it differently, what if our theoretical repertoires were to take inspiration not from thinking, but from eating? In Mol's case, it is eating that becomes the central domain of metabolic exchanges. She contrasts a figure of humans as walkers moving in the environment with a figure of eaters. As she says, while walkers, putting one foot in front of the other, move their bodies through their surroundings, eaters, as they bite, chew, and swallow, move their surroundings through their bodies. And to move surroundings through our bodies, well, that is the central figure I would like to ponder upon now. One thing that happens when you move the environment through you is that you cease to have control over the environment. The precondition of this action is some kind of porosity, some kind of openness towards the exterior. You are not perfectly isolated, immunized. You gave yourself up to be determined by the outside influences. What you eat, what you breathe, what microbiological particles enter your blood circulation, if you will, each metabolic act is a little occupation by the outside. Yet the immunized self, I would argue, is the dominant model of subjectivity or dominant mode of subjectivity in late modernity. A person is imagined as an over-individuated, sovereign, isolated unit wrapped in protective shells. Just think about an astronaut, as Ben Bratton writes, the Vitruvian man of the McLuhan era. The astronaut is not the somatic homo economicus, the nudity of dependencies. He is rather, and note the gendering here, he is rather a composite effect of interlocking organic and inorganic skins and metabolisms from the mechanical life support systems without which his bubble blurs, to trillions of microbes inside his gut without which his body will fail more slowly. An immunized self is a paradoxical self, which is not aware of its paradoxical nature. It is an entity that desperately tries to define itself in hostility to all things external, yet also it is an entity that is wholly dependent on the exterior. Another model of subjectivity is possible, a metabolic self. In 1968, an archaeological expedition in East Siberia discovered a clay jar more than 2,000 years old in the shape of a human head. It was categorized as belonging to the late period of so-called Tagar culture. This culture was significant for its complex funeral rituals. These featured multiple stages of burial and exhumation and elaborate techniques of mummification. Originally, it was assumed that the jar contains body remnants of a distinguished warrior or some kind of community leader. But the findings of the X-ray analysis suggested that it contains a skull that was significantly smaller than that of an adult human. Although the content of the object raised suspicion, the archaeologists did not have any non-invasive method at their disposal back then to verify the analysis, and so the Tagar clay head was simply shelved. However, in 2010, a new team of scientists examined the artifact with X-ray. This time, they used fluoroscopy as an imagining technique to better determine what lies inside the doll model of the supposed Tagar warrior. The results were quite surprising. The analysis indicated that the artifact contains a skull of a ram, a sheep. This raises a question that resonates with the proposed notion of metabolic self. Why would someone bury a non-human as a human? A possible answer goes as follows. The understanding of selfhood in a culture that permits the burial of an animal in human form may develop out of deep sociality, deep solidarity with the non-human world. Indeed, it seems that sheep ranked among the most celebrated domesticated animals in the ancient Siberian cultures. Hence, a ram hiding in a human clay head can be read as a confirmation of an intuitive social ontology that orients individual existence. It reorients this individual existence towards appreciating multi-species entangled biographies. And moreover, such a reading introduces the much-needed porosity or permeability of the self. So with the Tagar clay head, we encounter a gesture that anthropomorphizes the animal and at the same time animalizes the human. In other words, a metabolizing body is positioned here as a mediating entity, constantly overflowed by outside elements and processes. Hence, one's self is never an isolated island, but rather a provisional abjection of the cosmic outsideness. And this brings me to the concept of the body that was already discussed quite extensively. The body is a metabolism, the site of openness and exchange. The body is a member of the involuntary planetary cosmopolity of biological organisms. And in this sense, it is not different from nature. It is nature, in all its limiting and also transgressive aspects. One of my favorite theologists, Catholic theologist Marika Rose, puts it like this. Everything that is natural, except that nature itself is not natural, is perverse, is always growing and changing, breaking down and starting up differently. Nature is both lawmaker, and transgressor. Nature is always inconsistent and internally ruptured. We are bodies, but our bodies are not all. And so we grow and change. We struggle against the limits that constitute us. We cut our bodies to remove unwanted growths and to introduce new ones. We love our bodies, ourselves, exactly as they are, and so we seek their transformation at any cost. So we are bodies, first and foremost, not minds, not souls. Going back to Annemarie Moll's walkers and eaters, I would like now to propose a third figure, an athlete. Athletes exist in a strange superposition of activity and passivity, of being hijacked by their own bodies while also controlling them. Take the case of Simone Biles, the best artistic gymnast of our era, who withdrew from 2020 Tokyo Summer Olympics. Her withdrawal gives us a picture of the vulnerability of the human body under conditions of peak physical performance. Her own words are telling of the loss of control over the body. I'm getting lost in my skills. I just don't get how. It's like I'm so prepared that I don't know if I'm overthinking. It's getting to the point where it's becoming dangerous because I'm getting lost on all of my floor skills. As she further claims, She felt like a prisoner of her body and mind, which may be paradoxical to hear from one of the best athletes in our world today, but philosophically speaking, the point is very well taken. The interlacing of activity and passivity is central to any athletic performance. Take the case of my favorite sport, Muay Thai, commonly known as Thai boxing. When you practice a kick, you do thousands of reps until you get it right. That's not me, by the way, but I wish it were me. It's a body programming what you do when you, for example, train a kick or throw a punch. It's a body programming, a way how to condition the body to automate the movement. The better you get, the more you give up yourself to the physics of the movement, to the inertia of your body. What is going on then? Is it me, or am I just NPC of my body? Do I do the kick, or is the kick a result of deterministic laws of nature? Seen from first-person perspective, there is indeed a sense of deprivation of subjective agency, but at the same time, my agency actually increases as I add new skill to my martial arts portfolio. The crucial point is that myself, me, ego, is here in position of an observer, and the real work is done by something outside me, yet still somehow me. The same holds for long-term or chronic illness. The self here is a foam on a wave, present yet with no power, just a mere passenger. I would argue then that there is an inevitable, almost omnipresent moment of exteriority in our bodily experience, a moment that is profoundly voiding the meaning of self as a full, self-contained individual. How far this voiding can go? One answer lies in Indian and Chinese philosophical traditions, especially Yogacara Buddhist school of thought. Just as the empty skull of Tagar warrior / Ram, the mind itself is fundamentally empty container, claims Vasubandhu. The emptiness is in Vasubandhu's philosophy tantamount to lack of substance, an illusionary nature of both subjectivity and of objectivity. One of the great modern commentators of Yogacara school was 20th century Chinese philosopher Xiong Li. I've encountered his work thanks to Anna Greenspan, my colleague at NYU Shanghai, who studied Xiong's work in relation to media theory of wave fields. According to Xiong, reality is non-dual, non-dualistic. The substance and the illusion collapse into one process, which he calls the great function. He uses a metaphor of waves and ocean to make his point clear. Each and every wave has the ocean as its true source, yet the ocean manifests only through the waves. Interestingly, this kind of Buddhist perspective received quite serious reappraisal by contemporary philosophy of mind. Thomas Metzinger has spent past years conducting an extremely unorthodox research. He has been collecting accounts of no-self experiences of professional meditators. The goal? To identify the core aspects of what we call consciousness, and more particularly, whether any sense of self is needed in order to have conscious experience. As it turns out, according to Metzinger, you don't need a sense of self to have a conscious experience. Consciousness arises as a property of experiences themselves, and they are only afterwards stitched together into a coherent narrative of how to relate to this imaginary center of the experience, which we call the self. So, in a very fundamental sense, our bodies have capacity to be selfless, and in many ways, they act as selfless. Just think about all the processes in your organism that you are not even conscious of right now. And so now, I would like to push the boundary of the theory of self to the point where self finally disappears. There are moments when it can be reasonably argued humans are no selves, and that perhaps, sometimes, humans ought to be no selves. In the context of the emergent planetary community, humans are part of this community not as selves, not as citizens, but as bodies, as organisms. Look now at one of the many accounts of no self-experience that Metzinger with his team collected. There is no personal point of view. It's the world point of view. It's like the world looking, not me looking. The world is looking. Now replace world with planet, and you get the kind of ethical political standpoint that I am asking people to adopt as selfless bodies. Though manifold metabolic exchanges humans are embedded in as organisms, humans are linked to the planet like their non-cancelable umbilical cord. The task is to learn to see this. And to learn to see this, one must put the self aside first, to let it temporarily dissolve in generic metabolic medium of the planet. However, I am not saying that as citizens or as lovers, perhaps, we should be selfless, although in terms of love, it can be a good aspiration in my opinion, and in many cases for sure. But as planetary organisms, we are selfless, and we should be. Metzinger sees this planetary dimension of selflessness too. In the epilogue of his recent book, The Elephant and the Blind, he calls for cultivation of something he calls consciousness culture. The kernel of this culture is in the self-knowledge of ourselves as selfless creatures. He says, our species does not respect humanity as a whole, neither in the present nor in the future. Collectively, we lack the ethical integrity, the quality of compassion, and the capacity for rational action that would have enabled us to avert medium and long-term catastrophe at a moderate medium and short-term cost. We are causing an enormous amount of future suffering. That's what Metzinger says. And we are doing so knowingly. Very soon, therefore, it will no longer be possible to respect the behavior of large segments of humanity. We will no longer be able to take ourselves seriously, for our behavior does not change even when we clearly recognize that it must. This is where the idea of a new, secular form of spiritual practice comes back into play. There actually is something, according to Metzinger, that we can still respect in ourselves and others, the non-egoic form of conscious self-knowledge that gradually reveals itself in contemplative practice. This form of conscious self-knowledge is much deeper than the high-level dignity that rational subjects may or may not see and acknowledge in each other, because it creates a much more fundamental relationship between the individual and the community of all sentient beings capable of experiencing it. It is non-conceptual. It is ownerless. It has nothing to do with words or thoughts. Animals may have it. Perhaps future machines should have only this form of self-awareness. And the capacity for conscious but non-egoic self-knowledge is something that we can respect in ourselves and others, even if humanity as a whole fails. It has worth, and it can be valued. But first, it needs to be recognized. And that's the end of the long quote from The Elephant and the Blind. All right, so now let me explain. I've mentioned the planet a lot in the past couple of minutes, and it's good time to unpack this concept a little bit more. What is the planet, and how does it work? Basically, I want to show you how planets are dependent both on their cosmic context and on their evolution within this context. At the same time, it's going to be important to see planets also as metabolisms of sorts, just as bodies. And that's also where I'm going to start. So the first thing to note is that the planet is a metabolism to the extent to which it is a dynamic entity, constantly negotiating its relationship to the outside. The planet then can be seen as a generic space of manifold exchanges. First of all, there is a material and energetic exchange between the planet and its solar system, which trickles down to various metabolic exchanges between the layers of the planet itself. We can see this cascade of these metabolic exchanges on this table. The solar energy powers the convection, which is at the very top, and that's the movement of the molecules in the atmosphere caused by heat. This process locks staggering 900 terawatts of energy, which is roughly 20 times more than the whole human economy. Human economy is listed here at the very bottom of the table, under anthropospheric processes, with compound 47 terawatts. Also, note here that even the biospheric processes contain 4 times more energy than the human part of the planetary metabolism. Secondly, the planet as metabolism comes with a particular spatial form. It has a spherical shape, and it is organized into layers such as atmosphere, lithosphere, inner core. We can think about these layers as phase gradients, meaning that they represent different states of matter, such as gas, liquid, ice, solid, metals. This diagram nicely illustrates that. And it also points at the fact that cosmic composition of the planet itself diagrams, to some degree, the metabolic flows, since it is organized into consecutive, interconnected layers that condition each other. Now, let me link this spatial observation to a temporal, evolutionary perspective. In the interplay of the extraneous forces of the sun and the intrinsic dynamics of the planet, we can observe bootstrapping of multiple feedback loops that wrap up the planet. They turn the planet into an environment with increasing degrees of autonomy from the outer space. And as the planet matures, it becomes less and less determined by the outside factors and more governed by the processes of its own making. However, this autonomy is not a total insulation. Rather, it resembles constant negotiation of the planet's relative separation from its context, since it still needs this context for its existence. Just as cells or animals need their environment, the planet also needs its cosmic context. It can be argued that this process, in which the planet acquires subsequent degrees of autonomy from its cosmic context, is later rehearsed down the line with the emergence of life. Why? Because you can say that the planet follows a template of a metabolic process by maintaining the active separation from the environment similarly as a cell does. So perhaps the planet is the original metabolic template, an evolutionary predecessor of the living matter. Now, for any planet, not just Earth, it holds that the energy received from the star may dramatically impact what class the given planet belongs to, as well as whether it can be considered habitable for Earth-like life. Further, due to the atmosphere, which is the result of the interaction between the solar energy and the planet's affordances, the surface temperature of the planet can get higher than the temperature that would correspond to the energy between incoming stellar radiation and the residual heat disposed by the planet back to the cosmic void. In case of Earth, the difference is plus 33 degrees Celsius, which means that the Earth would be a frozen brick without its atmospheric envelope. The presence of atmosphere, a buffer zone between the inside and the outside, is what makes a planet habitable. Without it, the formation of the biosphere, at least according to current scientific understanding, is impossible. So if you will, the solar system presents the grand cosmic environment in which our planet sits. The cosmic ecology precedes the planetary ecology. Talking about biospheres, we must also understand that each biosphere is just another layer of the planet. There is a certain hierarchy or cascade of conditioning elements. The planet conditions the emergence of life by more rudimentary cosmic, geophysical, geochemical, and geological processes. As argued by Jan Spitzer, you cannot replicate origin of life just by mixing right chemical substances together. You need specific environment. You need an environment of an early Earth. That includes tides caused by moon. That includes presence of seawater, plus right rotation of the planet, plus, for example, magnetic field. An early Earth was basically a hot, spinning incubator of life, and such a unique environment is currently quite impossible to artificially reproduce. The important conclusion here is that we cannot talk about planet as something that hosts life. we need to talk about planets as something that make life happen. And it follows that life is a symptom of some major planets, just as planets are symptoms of some evolved major star systems. So seen from the cosmic perspective, the planet's habitability is just a phase. It comes and goes. Some planets have long windows of habitability, such as Earth. Some are very short. Think about Mars, with its brief period of surface lakes and seas, back like 3 or so billions years ago. Nevertheless, habitability remains an interesting concept. It originates in astrobiology and exoplanet research, but in my view, it has direct environmental implications for how to maintain viable human inhabitation of our planetary environment. In his recent collection of essays, Dipesh Chakrabarty proposes a maxim of planetary thinking: to keep other planets always in view, even if only implicitly. And this maxim suggests to think about planets in a generic cosmic view. In this view, the planets are treated as objects emerging from the broader context of the evolution and architecture of the solar system and their relation to the host star. Interestingly, Chakrabarty links this maxim to reorientation of global environmental political goals. We should not strive for sustainability of human inhabitation of the planet, but for maintenance of the planet's habitability, irrespective of given species. In other words, sustainability is a narrow-minded environmental goal, way too much human-centric, subservient to logic of economic growth. Habitability goes beyond. It is life-centric, biosphere-centric, and it looks at the planet from cosmic perspective. But what exactly means to keep a planet habitable? And is habitability really enough? That's what I will try to answer in this last section of my talk. Have any of you read this article published in Noima recently? It's great. It's by Sarah Volker, an astrobiologist and co-author of currently much discussed assembly theory. The article does what it says. It argues that AI is life, just not the kind of life we are used to from biology textbook. The rationale behind is astrobiological. We cannot expect that life we will discover elsewhere in the universe will be similar to our terrestrial life. Perhaps it will be silicon-based or nitrogen-based. Perhaps it will not need water at all. And if that is true, if life can be something else than what we know as life, what can stop us from stipulating that highly evolved, complex algorithms aren't a form of life too? Although Volker's claim may be too difficult to digest, there is a version of this astrobiological approach to life which I find actually quite clear and convincing. Michael Wong, Stuart Bartlett, Sehe Chen, and Louisa Tierney choose to distinguish between life as we know it, that is life with I, from more generic concept of life as we do not know it, that is life with I. Life is, and they really pronounce it like this, life. Life is any dynamic structure emerging from combination of informational driving substrate, energetic drivers, and sufficient combinatorial diversity of its building blocks. Down the line, such reconceptualization of life influences the definition of planetary habitability. In particular, suddenly it is not enough to think about the habitability of the planet for life as we know it. The planet engenders many types of creatures, many types of bodies, through its manifold intermediaries. And as humans belong to these intermediary substrates, we are the carriers of cultural and technological evolution. Hence, what Wong, Bartlett, and their colleagues call genesity is a proposal to rethink habitability in a larger space of possibilities. For example, making planet habitable exclusively for Earth-like life is not great for the planet's genesity. Its capacities to give rise to something unprecedentedly new are rather diminished in such a scenario. High genesity environments are more than habitable. They let cultural and technological evolution do its work as the extensions of the biological evolution, just as biological evolution is extended and complicated version of cosmic evolution. So we have here three terms now: sustainability, which is kind of human-centric; habitability, that's more life-centric; and finally genesity, which centers on generic abilities of the planet to engender and reproduce new forms of being in the world. In other words, it is about maintenance of creative abilities of the planet to assemble stuff. This also includes cultural and technological production, of course. So what is going on here is a kind of rehearsal of the collapse of nature-artificial dichotomy or nature-culture dichotomy. Canadian sci-fi author Carl Schroeder has proposed that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from nature. Perhaps some of you know this original version of this quote by Arthur C. Clarke, that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. For Schroeder, it is nature. In my perspective, sufficiently advanced technology means technology that bends towards convergence with planetary metabolism by expanding and repeating its processes, rather than by dramatically modifying or exploiting them. Hence, using the words of French philosopher of technology, Gilbert Simondon, the major stage of the evolution of technical objects is that when a technology comes closer to the mode of existence of natural objects. I have these reasons to believe so. I believe the convergence of technology in its indistinguishability from nature is actually some kind of necessity, a form of vertical imperative of technical evolution. So before I conclude this lecture, I want to talk about fates of inhabitants of other solar systems than ours. I want to talk about Fermi paradox, of course. And my favorite solution to Fermi paradox, perhaps you have different favorite solutions, but this is my favorite, was originally presented by Jacob Hack-Misra and Seth Baum in 2009. It is called simply sustainability paradox, or sustainability solution, sustainability solution to Fermi paradox. And it tackles conventional assumptions about the behavior of the extraterrestrials, simply called here ETI. As the Fermi paradox goes, it presupposes that ETI must want to communicate or visit us. And since they do not do so, it is rational to assume that they do not exist, and we are alone in the universe. But do they really have to have this urgency to communicate? Or do they have to have any kind of urgency to make some grandiose gestures for potential cosmic audiences? Well, according to these authors, the formulation of Fermi paradox is biased. It is biased because it is based on the observation of only one planetary community of intelligent species, which is humans, and also it is based on a very biased understanding of human history. That is, the idea that history unfolds in a progressive series of colonial expansions. This view does not really represent human history, as we know, and the authors themselves note this. A closer look suggests two problems. First, where human populations are exponentially expansive, they often, and perhaps always, do so unsustainably. That means in a way that leads to the eventual end, to the eventual extinction, or the eventual conclusion, or the exponential expansion. And second, not all human populations are actually exponentially expansive. Most of them in the history of humankind actually were not exponentially expansive. Therefore, the authors continue that the absence of ETI can be explained by the possibility that exponential growth is not a sustainable development pattern for intelligent civilizations. The authors thus hypothesize that exponentially expansive ETI doesn't exist. However, this does not rule out the existence of non-expansionist ETI, which leaves one open question. How would these historical and technological dynamics of such ETI look like with respect to their home planet? Well, if the sustainability solution holds, any viable ETI will tend to maintain its economy in close to zero growth, degrowth, post-growth, or steady-state condition. Put in the less technical vocabulary,
Sustainability solution to Fermi paradox implies that the absence of any detectable extraterrestrial activity is caused by the fact that intelligent life in the universe either self-destroys before reaching the point when its activity can be observable by our instruments, or that it is too busy saving its own planetary environment. After all, the image of technology as indistinguishable from nature is not strange to human communities on Earth. Take this example from a bit different field than outer space, and that's history of robotics. The first robot ever built in Japan was created in Osaka in the late 1920s. The robot was designed and manufactured by biologist Makoto Nishimura, and the robot's name was Gakutensoku, which means learning from laws of nature, learning from principles of nature. And I think there is really something important in this idea of learning from laws of nature, in how it navigates our technological imaginaries towards alignment with planetary environment and towards continuation of more than human metabolisms. So my belief is that there are histories of science and technology that tell a story of convergence with nature rather than the story of this kind of immunization and dominance. These stories see technologies as open and porous, just as human bodies are. And here I will also conclude. In the most philosophical chapter of his sci-fi novel Solaris from 1961, Stanislav Lem lets one of the main characters articulate his vision of the unremarkability of human existence in the cosmic context. It is summed up in this statement. Us, we're common. We're the grass of the universe, and we take pride in our commonness, that it's so widespread, and we thought it could encompass everything. The metaphor of the grass of the universe is indeed central to my interpretation of Fermi paradox, as it recognizes the crucial environmental implication of the potential existence of intelligent life in the universe. The history of human planetary community on Earth, including its possible future trajectories, is not a singular occurrence. Instead, it potentially unfolds throughout the cosmos in many permutations. Hence, the grass, as a relatively common category of plants, at least for the geographical regions of Eastern Europe from where both me and Lem come from, is linked here with the humans as members of potentially common category of intelligent life in the universe. In turn, the potentially large sample of planetary communities may lead to conclusions about likelihood of certain historical pathways. This implies some constrained space of possible trajectories of planetary history, something like a topology of history. And this convergence of nature and technology is likely one of those constraints. As some Fermi paradox scholars say, planetary communities may face a great filter at some point of their historical pathway. In my version, this great filter that separates survival from extinction is the ability to maintain genesity of the planetary environment. So every night you look at the sky, at the night sky, the stars speak to you. They tell a story about our possible futures. There is a good reason to feel haunted by the chilling cosmic silence, by these spectres of ancient and future planetary communities that failed to transition to cosmic silence deliberately rather than by catastrophe. And so in a way, just as Immanuel Kant had his moral law inside him and night sky above him, we have night sky too in this 20th century version, 21st century version actually, of this story. Just the moral law inside us got replaced by selflessness of our biological bodies. With genesity as the goal, the task is to cultivate something bigger than ourselves through the culture of selflessness. Selfless bodies cultivate consciousness culture and genesity of planetary environment as a precautionary tools against extinction. How so? Because the projects of cultivating consciousness culture and genesity are actually one and the same. They are isomorphic. Both projects meet and the imperative to let flourish forms of sentience across technospheres and biospheres. And both projects aim at collective fine-tuning of parameters rather than at a race to the top of the food chain pyramid. That is the normative credo, the article of faith, that I aim to unpack as the years of my research on planetary philosophy come to their full fruition. Thank you.